The sun was already past noon when Rickard Ashbourne finally opened his eyes. He lay on his back, staring at the cracked ceiling of his rented room, waiting for the world to stop punishing him for last night. It didn't. He sat up. Bad idea, but a necessary one. His head throbbed with the particular rhythm of a man who had made too many toasts to things that no longer existed. The ale of the copper cup had a way of blurring the edges of things, memories, regrets, the face of a woman he was better off not thinking about. And Rickard had leaned on that quality rather heavily over the past 2 years. He splashed cold water on his face, got dressed, and ran a hand through his hair in a gesture that accomplished nothing. Then he did what he always did when the morning caught up with him. He checked his pockets. Left pocket, right pocket, inner vest pocket. The small hidden fold in his coat lining he kept for emergencies. He found a button, an unrecognizable scrap of paper, and a smooth stone he had no memory of picking up. Not a single coin. He crossed the room, pried up the loose board by the window, and opened the tin box he kept there for exactly this situation. It was empty. Of course it was. Rickard stood up and looked out the window at Brindlewick going about its afternoon business without him. He needed money for the room, for food, for something resembling a reason to be somewhere. He needed work. This was not a new problem. Since coming back from the Ashfen campaign 2 years ago, he had worked the docks, hired himself out as a farm hand, swung a hammer for a carpenter, moved furniture, fixed fences. He had no trade, no particular calling, just a pair of hands that could do most things adequately and a stubbornness that kept him upright on days when upright felt optional. He put on his coat and went out into the street. He tried the blacksmith first. Aldrich barely looked up from his anvil. Got my nephew starting Monday. Sorry, Ashbourne. The cobbler on Stitch Lane was more polite about it. Cobbling takes years, Fenwick said, with the tone of a man closing a door gently but firmly. I've no use for a laborer here. The mill was fully staffed. The cartwright had just taken on 2 apprentices. The cooper waved him off before he finished his sentence. Rickard stood at the corner of Market Lane and Barrel Row and took stock. The afternoon was getting old. His headache had settled into a dull, determined presence behind his eyes, and his stomach had moved from polite suggestion to open complaint. He walked without particular direction, letting his eyes drift across the shop fronts. Past the chandler, past a tailor whose window display had not been updated in years, past a rope seller. And then he stopped. The building was solid and old, stone and heavy timber, the kind of structure that had decided long ago to stay standing and had simply never reconsidered. A painted sign above the door showed a rooster with its wings spread and an expression of extreme personal confidence. The Wild Rooster. Below it, nailed to the door, a smaller sign in large handwritten letters pressed deep into the wood with considerable force. Help wanted. Rickard read it twice. He looked to the slightly fogged windows, the faint warmth of lantern light inside, the absence of customers in the mid-afternoon lull. He pushed open the door. Inside, the Wild Rooster was clean and quiet. Heavy tables, scrubbed floors, a solid oak bar dark with years of use. A low fire in a wide hearth pushed warmth into the room without making a show of it. And from somewhere behind the door, the back of the bar, came the smell of something cooking, meat and herbs, deep and serious, that made Rickard's stomach do something embarrassingly hopeful. The place was empty. "Hello?" he called. "Is anyone here? I'm here about the help wanted sign." Silence. Then footsteps. Heavy and unhurried, the steps of someone who moves through a space like they own it. Because they do. The door behind the bar opened. Rickard had seen a fair number of things in 34 years. He'd held a defensive line for 6 hours in the Ashfen marshes. He was not, by any reasonable measure, a man who rattled easily. But his brain went briefly and completely blank. She was tall in a way that redefines the word. Broad-shouldered, solid with real work. Her skin the deep grey-green of Orcish blood. Strong features, dark hair pulled back and tied. A cook's apron over a heavy linen shirt bearing the honest evidence of a day's work. And eyes, amber, sharp, currently fixed on him with the expression of someone assessing whether a thing requires their attention. She said nothing for a moment, just looked at him. "You're here about the sign," she said at last. Not a question, a verdict being delivered. "I am," Rickard said. "I'm looking for work, whatever you need." She came around the bar without hurry and stopped a few feet away. She was 4 inches taller than him at minimum. She looked him over with the frank efficiency of someone who evaluates things professionally. "I'm Grenda," she said. "I run this place. Cook, manage, own the building." She said it without pride or apology, simply as a statement of fact. Most men who come in here about that sign take one look at me and remember somewhere else they need to be. "I don't have anywhere to be," Rickard said. It came out more honest than he'd intended. No polish on it, no performance. Just the plain truth. He had no one waiting, no place requiring his presence, nothing pulling him in any particular direction. He was a man between things, which meant that this doorway was, objectively, as good as any. Grenda studied him. "You look like you've been through something recently." "Long night." "Long several nights." She tilted her head slightly. "You think you can handle a full day's work?" "Because you look like a strong wind might be a problem." "I've handled stronger winds than this," Rickard said. She looked at him a moment longer, running whatever calculation she ran. Then she said, "We'll see what you're made of. But don't mistake this for being hired. You haven't earned that yet." She turned back toward the kitchen door, paused at the frame and looked at him over one broad shoulder. "Can you start now?" Rickard looked at the quiet tavern. The fire, the bar, the kitchen door still swinging slightly on its hinges. "Yes," he said. "Then come through," Grenda said, "and try to keep up." She disappeared into the kitchen. Rickard stood alone in the warmth for just a moment. Then he straightened his coat and followed her through the door. The kitchen of the Wild Rooster was not a large space, but it was an intensely organized one. The kind of organized that comes not from tidiness as a personality trait, but from years of working fast in close quarters and knowing exactly where everything has to be. Copper pots hung in size order above the central work table. Knives were racked by length. Dry goods were stored in labeled jars along the far wall with a precision that suggested anyone who returned something to the wrong place would hear about it at length. Grenda moved through it without looking. She didn't need to look. The kitchen was an extension of her, each surface and shelf exactly where her hands expected it to be. She pointed at a door to the left without breaking stride. "Through there." Rickard pushed it open. He stopped. The scullery behind the kitchen was a narrow stone room with a drain in the floor, a large wooden tub, 2 buckets of water, and a pile of dirty dishes that could, by any objective measure, be described as a mountain. Pots caked with the remnants of last night's service. Mugs in stacks, bowls, plates, ladles, a cast-iron pan that had seen serious use, all of it waiting with the patient indifference of inanimate things that know their time will come. Grenda appeared in the doorway behind him. "Last night was busy," she said, in a tone that did not apologize for this fact. "I want it done before the evening service. Soaps on the shelf, hot water from the pot on the stove. You'll need to refill it twice, maybe 3 times. She looked at the pile, then at him. Questions. Rickard looked at the mountain of dishes. He looked at the 2 buckets of water. He looked at the single cloth on the shelf beside the soap. No questions, he said. Something shifted in her expression, too brief and too small to name, but it was there. Then she turned and went back to her kitchen, and Rickard heard the sounds of preparation resume. The thud of a knife, the scrape of a pot, the low percussion of a cook at work. He rolled up his sleeves and got started. It took 2.5 hours. The first hour was simply hard work. Methodical, honest, the kind of labor that asks nothing of you except that you continue. The second hour was harder. His back registered its opinion. His hands, softened by too many recent weeks of doing very little, began to remind him that soap and hot water and rough clay are not a gentle combination. The cast iron pan turned out to have a relationship with the concept of cleanliness that could only be described as adversarial. He did not stop. He did not go back through the kitchen to ask for a break or a different task or any other concession. He simply worked through it, steady and unhurried, the way a man works when he has decided he is going to finish something regardless of what it costs. Once, Grenda appeared in the doorway. She looked at the shrinking pile, looked at him, said nothing, and went back to her kitchen. When the last pot was clean and stacked, and Rickard had poured the final grey water down the drain and hung the cloth over the edge of the tub, he rolled his sleeves back down, straightened up, and went back into the kitchen. Grenda was at the stove, tasting something from a long spoon. She did not turn around. "Done?" Rickard said. A pause. "Everything. Everything." She tasted whatever was on the spoon, made a small adjustment to the pot, and finally turned to look at him. She went to the scullery door and looked in. Came back. She said nothing. But she handed him a heel of bread and a small bowl of something dark and savory from the pot on the stove. It was, he had to admit, extraordinary, deep and rich in a way that suggested the recipe had history to it, layers that had been added and refined over years. He ate it in 4 bites and didn't say a word. Some things don't need commentary. "The evening crowd starts in an hour," Grenda said, watching him eat with the same appraising look she had given the clean dishes. "You'll set tables and help serve, and before that..." She paused, as though deciding something. "I have another task for you." Rickard spent the next 40 minutes restacking a delivery of supply crates that had arrived that afternoon. Flour, salt, dried goods, that had been stacked by whoever delivered them in a way that Grenda described with some restraint as useless. He reorganized the storeroom to her specifications, which she gave once and expected remembered, and carried a barrel of ale from the back entrance to the bar without being asked twice and without dropping it, which apparently was not something she took for granted based on the look she gave the barrel when he set it down intact. He was wiping down the bar when the door to the Wild Rooster swung open. Not the tentative push of a new customer or the polite entry of a regular. This was the entrance of people who are comfortable enough somewhere to open its doors the way they open their own. Wide, fast, and with complete confidence that they are welcome. 4 orcs came in. They were large, as orcs generally are. Broad across the shoulders, heavy in the way of people built for endurance rather than delicacy. Their grey-green skin weathered with outdoor work and the particular texture of people who spend considerable time not caring what the weather is doing. They wore the clothing of working men, heavy vests, worn boots, sleeves rolled past the elbow. They moved to the largest table by the fire with the ease of long habit and settled into their seats with the collective thud of people who have earned their rest. Then one of them noticed Rickard. He was a big one, the biggest of the four, with a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his jaw in the diagonal manner of something that had once been very fast and very sharp. He looked at Rickard the way you look at something that doesn't quite fit the established picture of a familiar place. "Huh," he said. "Since when does the Rooster have a human boy serving tables?" The other three looked over. There was a beat of silence, and then the laughter started. The easy, unhurried laughter of men who have found something genuinely amusing and have no particular reason to be polite about it. "Look at him," said one of the others, a stocky one with close-cropped hair and the hands of someone who works with stone. "He's tiny." "Is he the help?" the scarred one asked, to no one in particular. "What do they have you doing, little man? Fetching stools for the children?" More laughter. Not cruel exactly. It had the quality of men who are used to a particular scale of things and find the deviation genuinely funny rather than something requiring malice. But it was pointed. It had edges. Rickard set down the cloth he'd been using on the bar. He walked over to their table. He stood there, aware with a precise and unhurried clarity that the four of them could in practical terms do whatever they liked with him, and that this awareness changed nothing about what he was going to do, which was take their order. "Evening," he said. "What can I get you?" The scarred one looked at him for a moment with something recalibrating behind his eyes. Then he leaned back in his chair. "Ali," he said. "4, and whatever's on the fire tonight." "I'll find out," Rickard said. "Back in a moment." He went to the kitchen. Grenda was at the stove and she did not look up. But there was something in the quality of her stillness that told him she had heard the exchange through the kitchen door. "4 ales," Rickard said. "And they want to know what's on tonight." "Slow braised river elk," Grenda said, stirring, "with black root and bone gravy." A pause. "Tell them it takes 20 minutes. If they want something faster, they can go somewhere else." "I'll tell them. You're going back out there," she said. It was not quite a question. "That's the job," Rickard said. She said nothing, but she looked at him. A quick, measuring look, different from the others she'd given him today. Less like an assessment of an unknown quantity. More like the beginning of a different kind of verdict. He went back out. The evening passed in the ordinary rhythm of a tavern filling up. More customers arriving, the noise level rising, the fire burning higher as the night settled in. Rickard moved between the tables, learned the layout quickly, remembered orders without writing them down, and kept his manner the same regardless of whether the person he was talking to was a regular human trader or one of the 4 orcs by the fire who, as the ale worked and the elk arrived, had shifted gradually from amusement to a kind of grudging normalcy. By the time the scarred one, whose name turned out to be Vorg, called him over to settle their bill, there was no more commentary about size or species or the comedy of a human working at an orc-run establishment. Just a man who had done his job, and 4 customers who had eaten and drunk well and had no particular complaint about either. "Not bad," Vorg said, setting coins on the table. "Kitchen deserves that," Rickard said. "Not me." Vorg glanced toward the kitchen door. Briefly, with something complicated in it, and then back at Rickard. He picked up his coat. "You're all right," he said, which from the sound of it was not something he distributed generously. They left. Rickard collected the coins and the empty mugs and carried them to the bar. The common room was thinning now, the late hour settling over the remaining customers like a gentle suggestion. He'd been on his feet for hours. His back had opinions. His hands were raw. He realized with some surprise, almost steady, the way he used to feel after a long march, wrung out but aligned, like something had been asked of him, and he had given it. He was clearing the last table when Grenda came out of the kitchen. She moved through the emptying room, checked the bar, looked over the tables. She had the comprehensive, automatic survey of someone doing an end-of-night inventory that they have run 1,000 times. Then she stopped a few feet from Rickard. "Those 4, she said. "Vorg and his crew. They've been coming here for 2 years. A pause. "They've made that joke about every person who's worked here." Rickard stacked the last mug. "I figured. Most people laugh along." She said it flatly, without judgment, but without warmth either. Or get embarrassed, or say something stupid. None of those seemed useful. Grenda looked at him for a moment. The amber eyes moved across his face with that measuring quality that seemed to be her default mode of engagement with the world. "One more thing tonight," she said. "Then we're done." She went back into the kitchen. Rickard followed. The table in the center of the kitchen had been cleared. On it sat a bowl. The bowl was clay, wide and deep, clearly old, the kind of vessel that has been used so many times it has become smooth in a way that has nothing to do with how it was made. Inside, it was something that, at first glance, looked like a very dark porridge, thick, grey-brown, steaming slightly, and moving in places, in ways that porridge does not typically move. Rickard looked at the bowl. He looked at what was in the bowl. He looked back up at Grenda. "This," she said with the gravity of someone presenting something significant, "is grog mash." The word landed with the weight of a proper noun, a name, a title, something with history behind it. She said it the way you say the name of something old and serious. "It is the traditional dish of my people," Grenda continued. "My grandfather made it. His grandfather made it before him. It has been made the same way for longer than this city has had walls." She folded her arms. "Ground black grain, rendered marrow fat, dried cave mushrooms and—" She gestured at the bowl, specifically at the parts that were moving. "Sun-dried grub larvae, considered a delicacy." Rickard looked at the larvae. Several of them, dried and dark, curled on the surface of the grog mash with the composed stillness of things that had accepted their situation. "Considered by whom?" he said. "By people with sense," Grenda said. "Every person who works in this kitchen eats it before they're part of this kitchen. It is not optional. It is not negotiable." She tilted her head. Her eyes were bright with something that was not quite amusement and not quite challenge, but lived somewhere interestingly between the two. "It is, I will be honest with you, also a little bit a test." A pause. "To see who runs," she said. And then, with a grin that showed her canines very clearly and a laugh that filled the kitchen from wall to wall, "And if you don't eat it, I'll eat you instead." The laugh was enormous and genuine and entirely without malice. It was the laugh of someone who has made this joke before and has not yet tired of it, and probably never will. Rickard looked at the bowl. He looked at the larvae. He looked at Grenda, who was still grinning. He pulled the bowl toward him. Up close, the smell hit him first, dense and mineral and deeply unfamiliar, and something in his face did what faces do when the body reacts before the mind can intervene. Just for a second. 1 second, unguarded, before he put it away, picked up the spoon. He ate. It was. And he was not going to tell her this, not immediately, not without more time to process the information, not as bad as it looked. The black grain was dense and savory. The marrow fat gave it a depth that was, objectively, very good. The mushrooms were earthy and strong. The larvae were crunchy and had, of all things, a mild nutty quality that was not at all what he had braced for. He did not let any of this show on his face. He finished the bowl, set down the spoon, looked up. Grenda was watching him with her arms crossed and an expression that had shifted from glee to something quieter. Something that was paying attention in a different way. "Well," she said. "It's fine," Ricard said. A beat. "Fine," she repeated, as though the word had arrived in a language she wasn't expecting. "The mushrooms are good," he said. "Whatever you used." Grenda looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet around them, just the low sound of the dying fire. Then she said, "Tomorrow, 6 in the morning." She turned back to the stove and began covering the pots with the methodical efficiency of a person ending their day. "Don't be late." Ricard set the bowl in the scullery and picked up his coat from the hook by the door. He paused for just a moment at the threshold. "Good night, Grenda." She didn't look up, but something in the set of her shoulders, the slight adjustment in the angle of her head, something very small, shifted. "Good night," she said. Short, factual. He let himself out into the cool night air and stood for a moment on the street outside the Wild Rooster, the sign above him creaking gently in the breeze. He was hired. He was fairly sure of that. Not because she had said so, she had not said so in any words, but because she had given him tomorrow, and tomorrow was a thing that mattered. He put his hands in his coat pockets, found the smooth stone still there, and walked back through Brindlewick toward his rented room and the cracked ceiling that was, tonight, considerably easier to look at. The first week passed the way hard work always passes, quickly in memory, slowly in the body. Ricard was at the Wild Rooster by 6 every morning. Grenda was always already there. He had no idea what time she arrived, whether she slept at the tavern or somewhere nearby, or possibly not at all, because every morning, without exception, she was in the kitchen when he came through the door, moving through her preparations with the focused economy of someone who has been at it for hours. The fire was lit. Something was already on the stove. The kitchen smelled of whatever she'd decided that day would be the foundation of everything else. She gave him his tasks in the morning and expected them done without follow-up. She did not hover. She did not check in. Either the work was done or it wasn't, and if it wasn't, you heard about it once, clearly, without decoration, and that was the end of it. Ricard found this, to his mild surprise, comfortable. He had spent 2 years in situations where the expectations were unclear and the feedback was either absent or excessive. There was something straightforward about working for someone who simply told you what they needed and trusted you to deliver it. He set tables. He carried things. He learned the layout of the storeroom well enough that he could find anything in the dark. He figured out, without being told, which regular customers preferred which seats, which ones wanted to be left alone with their drinks, and which ones wanted someone to talk at. He had a way with people. He had always had this, even in the army, the ability to sit down next to someone and not make them feel crowded, to listen in a way that didn't demand anything back. The tavern began, quietly, to fill more. Not dramatically, not overnight. But there was a Tuesday when 3 merchants came in for lunch who had not been there before, sent by someone who had eaten there the previous week. There was a Thursday when the usual evening crowd was joined by a family from the next street who had apparently finally decided to try the place after walking past it for months. Small things. The difference between a room that is half full and a room that is 2/3 full. Grenda noticed. She said nothing about it. Nothing directly. But once, passing behind him while he was talking a nervous young tradesman through the menu, she paused for just a fraction of a second longer than the space required. That was how Grenda communicated approval, in fractions of seconds. It was on a Thursday afternoon, in the quiet hour before the evening service, that Rickard first saw the portrait. He was wiping down the shelves along the back wall of the kitchen, a task Grenda had assigned him with the instruction that they needed a proper clean, not a quick pass, when he moved a large jar of dried mushrooms and found himself looking at a small framed drawing hung on the wall behind where the jar had been. It was a pencil sketch, done with care and some skill. An orc, male, older, broad like Grenda was broad, with the same strong jaw and the same quality of taking up exactly as much space as he occupied, and no more. He was standing at a stove in 3/4 profile, and there was something in the way he held himself, weight forward, completely absorbed, that was unmistakably the posture of someone who loves what they are doing. Rickard looked at it for a moment. Then he replaced the jar, finished the shelf, and didn't say anything. He waited until later, when the service was winding down and Grenda was doing her end-of-night review of the larder, moving jars and checking levels with the automatic thoroughness of someone who runs out of nothing and plans to keep it that way. "The portrait behind the mushroom shelf," Rickard said. "Who is that?" Grenda did not turn around immediately. She moved one more jar, checked its label, set it back. "My grandfather," she said. "He cooked. He was the best cook I've ever known." She said it plainly, without sentimentality and without embarrassment. Just a fact, stated at its proper size. He learned from humans, traveled when he was young, worked in 3 different cities, came back and brought everything with him. She paused. People thought he was strange for it. Orcs don't generally. A brief pause, the kind that holds something more than it shows. Go in that direction. But he did anyway. "He cooked what he cooked," Grenda said, "and people ate it. Whatever they thought of him before they sat down, after they ate, they came back." She closed the larder. He used to say that food is the only argument that always wins. You can disagree with a person, distrust them, want nothing to do with them, but if they feed you well, your body remembers it, whether you want it to or not. She turned then and found Rickard leaning against the work table, listening with a particular quality of attention that did not rush her or require her to be more than she was being. Something moved across her face, too quick to identify. "He taught you," Rickard said. "Everything," Grenda said, "from when I was small enough that he had to lift me up to reach the stove." Something in her voice shifted register, just slightly. Not softer exactly, but different. A frequency she didn't normally use. "He died 6 years ago, left me this building and everything in it." She moved back to the stove and began banking the fire for the night. The conversation, by all appearances, was over. Rickard straightened up and went to help with the closing work without saying anything further. He understood, from considerable personal experience, the difference between a conversation that has reached its natural end and a conversation that has been closed because going further would cost something the other person wasn't ready to spend. He let it be. But as he worked alongside her in the quiet kitchen, the fire settling, and the pots cooling, and the last of the night's work being put away, he was aware of something in the room that had not been there before. Not between them exactly. Nothing so direct as that. More like the room itself had changed slightly in temperature, become by a few degrees less defended. The moment with the soup happened on a Friday. Grenda was at the stove, occupied with the elk and black root that had become something of a signature of the Rooster's evening service, since enough people had ordered it and come back specifically for it, that removing it would have constituted a decision. Rickard was working on something at the secondary counter. There were some late autumn root vegetables that needed to be dealt with, and he'd been doing so quietly and without instruction, in the manner of someone who has looked at what needs doing and simply started. He had not followed a recipe. There was no recipe. He had worked with what was there: the roots, some dried herb from the shelf, a splash of the cooking stock from the pot Grenda had set aside, an amount of butter that she probably would have considered excessive. He had not said anything about it. He had simply made it and set it on the edge of the work table where she would encounter it when she turned around, which she did, eventually, and found a small bowl of braised root vegetables with an expression of no particular expectation on his part. She looked at the bowl. She looked at him. She picked up a spoon and tasted it. He watched her face for approximately 3 seconds before looking away and going back to what he was doing. There was a silence. "The butter," she said. "Too much," he agreed. "Yes." A pause. "The herb balance is right." This was, from Grenda, a substantial compliment. He understood that by now. He said nothing. She tasted it once more, set the spoon down, and went back to the elk. The bowl stayed on the work table. By the time the evening service was over, it was empty. She'd eaten it herself over the course of the night, between tasks, in the way of someone who keeps returning to something without making a formal decision to do so. He noticed. He said nothing. It was late on a Saturday night. The fire burned down to coals, the last customer gone, the chairs up on the tables, when they were finishing the final cleanup, and Rickard, without particularly planning to, said, "I was a soldier." Grenda was wiping down the bar. She did not stop or look up, which was the right response, and he was grateful for it. "Ashfen campaign," he said. 3 years. Came back 2 years ago." He moved a chair. "There was a woman I expected to come back to. She hadn't waited." He said it in the tone of a man reporting a fact that has been processed enough times that the sharpest edges have worn down, though the shape of it remains. "I haven't been especially good at having reasons for things since then." Grenda was quiet for a moment, still wiping the bar. Then, "Why are you telling me this?" It was a genuine question, not a deflection. Direct, the way she was direct about everything. Rickard thought about it honestly. "Because you told me about your grandfather," he said. "Seemed fair." Grenda stopped wiping the bar. She looked at the cloth in her hand for a moment, then set it down. She didn't look at him. She looked at the bar surface, at the old grain of the oak. "The orcs in this city," she said, and her voice had that other frequency in it again, the one she kept below the everyday register. "They don't like what I do here. What my grandfather did, they call it—" She made a sound that was not quite a word, something in the orcish tongue that had a shape suggesting something small and compromised. There's not a good translation. Something like performing for humans. Like cooking food people enjoy instead of food that proves something is a kind of weakness. "And the humans," Rickard said. "The humans see what I look like and have already decided." She said it without bitterness, more like a woman describing a weather pattern she has learned to navigate. So, she picked up the cloth again, folded it. "I cook. The food is good. Sometimes people notice and sometimes they don't. And I keep cooking either way, because it is what I know how to do and what my grandfather taught me to do, and I'm not going to stop because other people are small about it." She put the cloth on the shelf. "That," she said, and now there was something that might, at a considerable distance, be recognized as dry humor. is more than I have said about that to anyone in approximately 3 years. Rickard looked at the fire. I won't do anything with it. I know, Grenda said. It was the first time she had said something to him that assumed anything about his character. He noticed. He did not remark on it. They finished the closing work in silence, but it was a different silence than before. Not the silence of two people in the same space maintaining appropriate distance, but the silence of two people who have said enough for one night and are comfortable letting it rest there. She locked up. He walked out into the street. He stood under the creaking rooster sign for a moment, looking up at it. He had not thought about the Ashfen campaign all week. He had not thought about the woman who hadn't waited. He had thought about whether the barrel was getting low, and which table needed a wobbly leg fixed, and whether the dried herbs on the third shelf were going to last through to the next market day. He had thought about what he was doing, rather than what he wasn't. He put his hands in his pockets and found the smooth stone still there and walked home through the quiet streets of Brindlewick with the specific and somewhat unfamiliar sensation of a man who has somewhere to be in the morning. He arrived on a Tuesday morning, which was, Rickard would later think, a very Tuesday sort of thing to do. His name was Aldous Merrick, and he was the kind of man who had clearly spent considerable energy constructing himself. His coat was expensive and recent. His boots were clean in a way that suggested he had not walked far in them and did not intend to. He was perhaps 50, with the well-maintained look of someone whose comfort had been consistent for long enough that he wore it in his posture. The particular ease of a man accustomed to rooms tilting in his direction. He came in just before the midday service, when the wild rooster was quiet, and Rickard was setting the last of the tables. He looked around the room the way a man looks at something he is already calculating, and then he sat down at a table near the center without being invited to, and placed a leather satchel on the surface in front of him with a small, deliberate sound. "I'd like to speak with the proprietor," he said. Rickard went to the kitchen. Grenda came out, wiping her hands on her apron, and stopped when she saw him. Something in her face, subtle, almost nothing, closed slightly, the way a window closes before weather. "Merrick," she said. "Grenda." He smiled. It was a competent smile, the kind that has been used many times in many rooms and knows exactly what it is doing. "I won't take much of your time." He opened the satchel and placed a document on the table. Grenda crossed the room and looked at it. She did not pick it up. She read it from where she stood, and Rickard watched her face from across the room, and the thing that happened to it was not fear and was not anger. It was the expression of a person who has been waiting for something unpleasant and has now been told when it arrives. "The building's debt," Merrick said pleasantly. "Your grandfather took a loan against the property some years ago. Small amount, originally. It has, over time, accumulated." He folded his hands on the table. "I've acquired that debt from the original creditor, who was, I'll be honest with you, not especially interested in pursuing it. An old friend of your grandfather's, as I understand it. The kind of man who considered the debt a personal arrangement rather than a financial one. He passed away last month. His estate was less sentimental. I am." "How much?" Grenda said. He told her. The room was very quiet. It was not an impossible sum. It was not an absurd, invented number designed to be unpayable on its face. It was precisely the kind of number that was almost manageable. The kind that might have been manageable in different circumstances, in a better season, if the past 2 years had gone differently. Instead, it sat on the table between them like something with weight. 3 days, Merrick said. "Full settlement, or we discuss a transfer of ownership." He paused, arranging his expression into something that resembled regret. I'm sorry for the difficulty. Business, as they say." He picked up the document, replaced it in his satchel, and stood. "I'll see myself out," he said. He left. Grenda stood in the middle of the room for a moment after the door closed. She stood very still, the way she went still when she was thinking through something she did not intend to let show on her face. Then she turned and went back into the kitchen. Rickard followed her. She was at the stove, but she was not cooking. She was standing in front of it with her hands flat on the edge of the work table and her eyes on the middle distance, running numbers or plans or something else entirely through whatever process she ran things through. "How bad is it?" Rickard said. "Bad enough." She pushed off the table, began moving, not toward any particular task, just moving, the way people move when they need to be doing something with their body while their mind works. "I don't have it. Not in 3 days. Not even close." "Can you borrow it?" A short sound. "From whom?" He didn't push that. He understood what she meant. The bank would look at her and see what the bank always saw when it looked at her. The people in the city who had money and might lend it were the same people who crossed the street when she was on the pavement. "Merrick," Rickard said. "What does he want with the building?" "There's a new trade road being planned," Grenda said. "Beryl Row becomes a significant street once it's finished. This building, on this corner." She stopped moving and looked at the kitchen walls. "It becomes worth considerably more than he's paying for the debt." She said it simply. No drama, just the geometry of it, laid out plainly. Rickard leaned against the doorframe. He looked at the kitchen, the copper pots in their order, the knives in their rack, the portrait behind the mushroom shelf, just barely visible from this angle. He thought for a moment. "There's a town gathering Friday," he said. "Market day. Half the city comes through the square." "Yes. We set up a table, open service, no charge. You cook, people eat." He paused. "The debt is a legal matter, and I can't fix that. But Merrick's real play isn't just the debt. It's that no one in this city is going to argue for this place when he moves to take it. He wants people to either not care or agree with him." He met her eyes. "So we make them care before he gets the chance." Grenda was quiet for a long moment. She looked at him with those amber eyes that did not miss things. "You think people will eat at a table run by an orc in the middle of the public square?" she said. Not bitterly. Just the plain question. "I think people eat food," Rickard said. "And I think your food is better than anything else in this city. And I think once they sit down, they'll remember it." The silence stretched. Then Grenda said, and her voice had dropped to that lower register again, the one she kept below the daily surface. "The last time I tried something like that, I was younger, just after my grandfather died. Set up at the harvest market, had a full spread ready." She stopped. Nobody sat down. I stood there for 2 hours. Then I packed everything up and came home. She looked at the floor, then back up. "That is not a small thing to do again." Rickard was quiet for a moment. He did not say it would be different this time. He did not say, "Don't worry," or "I promise." He understood from personal experience that those phrases are what people say when they don't know what to say, and they are rarely useful. Instead, he said, "Your grandfather cooked for people who were afraid of him, and they came back. You told me that yourself." She looked at him. "He didn't do it alone," Rickard said. "He had kitchens and staff and time. You have—" He paused. "Me. And 3 days. And the best elk and black root in 100 miles. He held her gaze. "It's not nothing." The kitchen was quiet around them. The fire ticked. Something in the pot made a small, comfortable sound. Grenda turned away. She was quiet for long enough that he thought she had decided against it and was simply waiting for him to accept that and move on. He was prepared to accept that. It was her choice to make, not his. Then she said, "Friday morning, early. I'll need 4 hours of preparation." "I'll be here at 5, Rickard said. She nodded once, the nod of someone who has made a decision and has already begun thinking about execution. "The grog mash," she said, almost to herself. "I'll make the grog mash." Rickard raised an eyebrow. "Not for the square," she said, and there was something in her voice that might, in someone else, have been called the very early cousin of dry amusement. "For us, before we go, for courage." A pause. "It's traditional." "Of course it is," Rickard said. Friday came in cold and clear, the kind of autumn morning that apologizes for nothing. They arrived at the square before the market stalls were fully set up, and by the time the first traders were arranging their goods and the first townspeople were coming through with their baskets, Grenda and Rickard had a table set, a portable brazier burning, and the smell of slow-braised elk and black root doing what that smell did, which was to reach into people's awareness from 20 feet away and ask them a question they hadn't expected. Merrick arrived at mid-morning. Rickard saw him come into the square from across the crowd. The expensive coat, the clean boots, the satchel. He had brought 2 men with him, both broad and quiet, the kind of presence that communicates a thing without saying it. He also had, Rickard noted, a document under his arm and the look of a man arriving at a formality that has already been settled. He found a spot near the market master's platform and spoke to a few people. Merchants Rickard recognized as having weight in the town's commerce. A man in a clerk's coat who appeared to be taking notes. The small preparatory assembly of a man who has done this before and knows the choreography. Grenda had seen him too. She said nothing. She ladled a bowl of elk for a woman who had stopped at the table somewhat hesitantly and was now eating with the focused attention of someone who has been surprised. "Is this from the rooster?" the woman asked. "Yes," Grenda said. The woman looked up at her. The instinctive reaction, the quick reassessment, the brief internal negotiation that Rickard had watched happen 100 times. Then she looked back at the bowl. "My husband said the elk was remarkable," she said. "I thought he was exaggerating." "He wasn't," Grenda said. The woman almost smiled. She took another spoonful. More people drifted over. The smell did its work. Some of them hesitated at the sight of Grenda and kept walking, and those were the ones they could not help. But enough stopped. Enough sat or stood and ate and did the thing that Grenda's grandfather had understood and that Grenda had inherited, along with the copper pots and the portrait and the recipe for grog mash. The thing where the food reaches somewhere past whatever a person has already decided and simply is what it is. Vorg was there. He and his crew came through the market and found the table and ate standing up, quickly and without ceremony. And Vorg said nothing, but he stood near the table for a while after he finished, which was its own kind of statement. It was when the square was at its fullest that Merrick moved to the platform. He did it smoothly, with the practiced confidence of a man who knows how to hold a crowd's attention without appearing to demand it. He spoke about the neighborhood, about commerce and standards and the future of Brindlewick as the trade road changed things. He was good at it, reasonable sounding, never hostile on the surface, letting the implications do the work while the words stayed polite. He said that certain establishments gave visitors a particular impression of the town. He said that standards of hygiene and conduct were a matter of civic concern. He said, with a regretful pause that he had clearly rehearsed, that he was acting on behalf of the community's best interests. It was, Rickard thought, A very good performance. He had set down his ladle and walked toward the platform before he had consciously decided to. He was not a speaker. He knew that. He had no formal argument prepared, no legal counter, no rhetorical strategy. What he had was the plain and direct way of a man who has spent years in situations where what you said had better be exactly what you meant, because there was no time and no room for it to be anything else. "I work at the Wild Rooster," he said, loud enough to carry. The square did not go fully quiet, but the area around the platform did. "I've been there 2 weeks. I've seen that kitchen every day." He looked at Merrick, who was watching him with the polished patience of a man confident that this kind of interruption resolves itself quickly. "I've never seen a cleaner one. I've never eaten better food." "No one is questioning the—" Merrick began. "You're questioning everything about it," Rickard said. "Not hot, not raised. Just flat and accurate. You're standing here in front of people who haven't eaten there and giving them a picture of the place. I'm giving them a different picture. They can decide which one came from someone who actually knows." A silence. "This is a man who works there," Merrick said, turning to the small assembly with an easy gesture. "Paid by the proprietor. With respect, ask them," Rickard said. Merrick paused. Rickard turned to the square. "Anyone here who's eaten at the Rooster? Anyone who's sat down and had a meal there? Say so." It was a risk. He knew it was a risk the moment the words were out. Because if no hands went up, if nobody spoke, then what he had done was make Grenda's situation precisely and publicly worse. A beat of silence. Then the woman who had been surprised by the elk said clearly, "I've eaten there." And Vorg said, from where he was standing, in a voice that required no effort to carry, "We eat there every week." And one of the merchants Rickard recognized as a regular, a quiet man named Osbert, who rarely said anything in the tavern except his order, said, "Best meal in Brindlewick, has been for 2 years." It was not a roar. It was not a dramatic reversal of fortune. It was 3 people in a public square saying a simple, true thing, which is often more durable than a speech. Merrick looked at the assembly. He looked at his clerk, who had stopped writing. He looked at the document under his arm. He stepped down from the platform, his 2 men falling in behind him without a word, his clerk tucking away his notes and following without being asked, and left. He did not make a scene about it. He was too practiced for that. He would regroup, Rickard knew. Find another angle, another mechanism. This was not over in any permanent sense. But today, in this square, in front of these people, he had nothing left to do that would not cost him more than he was willing to spend. Rickard turned back toward the table. Grenda was standing behind it, very still, her hands at her sides. She was not looking at the platform or at the retreating figure of Merrick. She was looking at Rickard. He walked back across the square toward her. He had been in enough situations to know when he had done something that mattered to someone, and the expression on Grenda's face was not gratitude exactly. It was something that had not settled into a word yet, something that was still finding its shape. Her jaw was set. Her amber eyes were bright in a way that was not their usual sharpness. She said nothing when he reached the table. He picked up his ladle and nodded at the line of people still waiting. "Couple more bowls to get through," he said. Another beat. "Yes," Grenda said. Her voice was level. "Normal." She turned back to the brazier. But her hands, when she reached for the serving bowl, were not quite steady, and she did not try to hide it. And Rickard, who was looking at the line of waiting people and not at her, gave her the privacy of not noticing. That same evening, after they had packed up the table and the brazier, and walked back to the Wild Rooster through the cooling streets. A written notice arrived by messenger. Merrick was extending the settlement deadline by 1 week. He had done the calculation, and pushing forward publicly after what had happened in the square would cost him more in reputation than the debt was worth to press immediately. The letter was polite. It was also, Rickard thought when Grenda showed it to him, the most honest thing the man had done since he walked through the door. The debt did not disappear on its own. That was not how debts worked, and Rickard had never been the kind of man who expected problems to resolve themselves out of politeness. What happened was this. Osbert, the quiet merchant who had spoken in the square, came into the Wild Rooster the following Monday morning before the lunch service with a proposition. He knew the sum. Grenda had gone to him the evening after the square, not to ask for anything, but because she had needed to say it out loud to someone she trusted, and Osbert had been the person she thought of. He had listened without interrupting and had not offered anything that night. He had simply gone home and done his own thinking. He had spoken to 2 other traders who ate at the Rooster regularly. Between the 3 of them, they were willing to cover the debt as a short-term loan, repayable over a year at terms that were, by any measure, fair. Not charity. A business arrangement between people who had decided that the Wild Rooster was worth keeping on Barrel Row. Grenda listened to the proposition without expression. She asked 3 precise questions about the terms. She said she would need to think about it. She came to Rickard that evening after service and told him what Osbert had offered. "What do you think?" she said. Which was, he had come to understand, not a request for direction. It was the way she processed things, by saying them to someone who would listen without pushing her toward a conclusion she hadn't reached herself. "I think Osbert has eaten here twice a week for 2 years," Rickard said. "I think he knows the difference between a favor and an investment." Grenda was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather never borrowed," she said. "Your grandfather didn't have Merrick." She turned the cloth over in her hands. "Set it down." "Yes," she said. "To Osbert's offer, to the terms, to the year ahead of it. All of it in 1 word." She sent word to Osbert the next morning. Merrick did not return. Not that week, not the week after. Rickard did not think they had heard the last of him. A man who moves the way Merrick moves does not abandon a calculation. He adjusts it, but for now, the building was theirs, the debt was structured, and the Wild Rooster was still standing on the corner of Barrel Row, with the sign above the door and the fire going inside. The square had done something, though. That was the part that could not be entirely explained by the debt settlement or the merchant's loan. Something had shifted in the neighborhood's relationship with the place. Not dramatically, not universally, but perceptibly. The woman who had been surprised by the elk came back with her husband. A family from 2 streets over started coming on Fridays. One of the merchants who had been standing near Merrick's platform during his speech came in alone one afternoon, sat at the bar, ordered the soup, and left without saying anything about the square. He came back the following week. The tavern was not transformed overnight. It was filling the way things fill when the reason is solid rather than fashionable. Steadily, 1 person at a time, each one coming back because the food was what it was and the room was what it was. Grenda cooked. She cooked the way she had always cooked, which was completely and without compromise. The elk, the black root. Dishes that Rickard gradually learned had names in the Orcish tongue that translated into things like deep winter soup and the grandfather's bread. Things with histories behind them that she shared in small pieces, on quiet evenings, in the way she shared most things. Briefly, without ceremony, as though the information were incidental to something else she was already doing. The portrait came off the wall behind the mushroom shelf. She moved it to the kitchen wall proper, where it was visible from anywhere in the room. Rickard noticed. He did not comment on it. 3 weeks after the square, on a Thursday night, the last customer left late, and the fire had burned low, and they were doing the closing work in the familiar rhythm that needed no discussion by now. Grenda on the kitchen, Rickard on the common room, meeting in the middle at the bar to finish up. He was stacking the last of the mugs when he heard her laugh. Not the large, deliberate laugh she deployed for the grog mash ceremony. This was smaller and more sudden. The laugh of someone who has been caught off guard by something genuinely funny in a way they did not see coming. He came around to the kitchen door. She was standing at the secondary counter with a bowl in front of her, and in the bowl was something dark and dense and unmistakably grog mash. Not a leftover. The clay bowl was clean and the portion was fresh, made recently and deliberately. She had clearly prepared it at some point during the evening without mentioning it to anyone. "What?" Rickard said. "I made it this morning," she said. She was still smiling, not performing it, just wearing it, the way a person looks when the amusement is real and they haven't yet thought to put their face back to its usual setting. "I don't know why, I made it." She looked at the bowl, then at him. "It sat here all day." She picked up a spoon and handed it to him across the counter. He looked at the bowl. He looked at her. "Again," he said. "It is never not going to be a test," she said. He took the spoon. He ate a spoonful of grog mash, the third time now, which meant it had crossed from ordeal into something approaching familiarity. The black grain, the marrow fat, the mushrooms, the larvae, dried and nutty, entirely undeserving of their reputation. He set the spoon down. "Tell me something," he said. "The first time, the larvae, were they dried?" Grenda said. "You're sure?" "I have been making grog mash since I was 7 years old." "Yes, I am sure." "You said sun-dried." "They are sun-dried." Some of them were moving. A pause, a very deliberate pause. "That," Grenda said with great composure, "is what I said. Sun-dried." She picked up a cloth and turned back to the counter. "What you imagined you saw is not my concern." Rickard looked at the bowl. He looked at her back, the set of her shoulders, the careful neutrality she was projecting at the counter surface. "Grenda, I have cleaning to do. You're laughing." "I am not." She was. He could hear it in the particular quality of her silence, the compressed quality of someone holding something in. Her shoulders were doing something they didn't usually do. He started laughing too. He couldn't help it. It came up from somewhere undefended, the kind of laughter that doesn't ask permission. He hadn't laughed like that he genuinely couldn't remember how long. Long enough that it felt like finding something in a coat pocket he'd forgotten he owned. Grenda turned around. And she was laughing too, fully, the real version of it. Not the enormous performed laugh of the grog mash ceremony, but something looser and less prepared. The laugh of a person who has let their guard down far enough for genuine amusement to get through. It changed her face completely. Not making her less herself, making her more herself, some version of herself that usually stayed behind the amber-eyed assessment and the efficient economy of her daily expression. They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen counter and laughed about larvae until it ran its course. When it settled, the kitchen was quiet again. The fire had gone down to its lowest. The pots were cooling. The portrait of her grandfather was visible on the wall behind her, the sketch of him at his stove, absorbed in his work, in the posture of someone doing exactly what they were meant to do. Grenda looked at Rickard across the counter. He looked back, It was a different kind of looking than the assessment she had given him on the first day. That inventory she had run with frank professional efficiency. The look of a person deciding whether something had use. This was not that. This was slower and less certain, and had in it the quality of something that did not quite know what it was doing yet and was not in a hurry to decide. He held it for a moment. Then she picked up her cloth and turned back to the counter. "The shelves need wiping," she said. Her voice was perfectly level. "Almost." "I'll do the bar," Rickard said. His voice was the same. "Almost." He went back out to the common room and picked up his cloth and stood at the old oak bar for a moment before he started working, looking at the room. The tables heavy and clean. The fire low and steady. The sign visible through the small window above the door. The rooster with its wings out, its expression of absolute personal conviction. He thought about the tin box with nothing in it. The cracked ceiling, the stone in his pocket that he still hadn't thrown away. He thought about a woman who cooked food that her grandfather had taught her and refused to change it regardless of what anyone thought, and the portrait moved from behind a shelf to a proper wall because something had shifted enough to allow it. He started wiping down the bar. He would be here at 6 tomorrow. She would already be there. The kitchen would smell of whatever she decided was the foundation for the day. She would give him his tasks and expect them done, and the tavern would fill a little more, one person at a time, and outside the trade road would eventually be finished, and Barrel Row would become what it was going to become, and Merrick would make his next move whenever he made it, and all of that would have to be dealt with when it arrived. But tonight, the fire was low, and the bar needed wiping, and somewhere in the kitchen, Grenda was finishing the closing work, and there was something steady in that, something that had the shape, if not yet the name, of a reason to be somewhere. He finished the bar. He put on his coat. "Good night, Grenda," he called toward the kitchen. A pause. Shorter than it used to be. "Good night," she said. He let himself out into the autumn street. The sign creaked above him in the cold air. He stood under it for a moment, hands in his pockets, and found the smooth stone where it had always been. He looked at it for a moment in the light from the tavern window. Then he put it back. "Some things you keep,"